She faced the worst news of her life, only to discover that the person she loved most had abandoned her. This is her journey of betrayal, survival, and the courage to reclaim her own life.
I remember the sterile scent of the hospital room, a strange mix of antiseptic and fear that clung to my clothes even after I left. The doctor's lips were moving, but the words blurred together like someone had turned down the volume of life itself. Stage 2, treatable, but we need to start soon. That's all I caught. Cancer. My brain froze around that single, monstrous word. When I walked out into the parking lot, the world felt quieter, heavier. The sky was painfully blue, as if mocking the storm that had just started inside me. I sat in the car for what felt like hours, watching people come and go, living their ordinary lives, while mine had just split into two halves, before and after. At home, I didn't tell Daniel right away. I wanted to wait until dinner. That was our time, the one constant thing between us. He'd walk in, loosen his tie, kiss my forehead, and ask, "What's for dinner, love?" I thought maybe, for once, he'd noticed the trembling in my hands, the way I'd been holding my breath since the doctor's office. When he arrived, he didn't notice anything. He was on his phone, scrolling through something about work, laughing at messages I wasn't part of. I waited for him to put the phone down. He didn't. So I said it, just like that, no buildup. "Daniel, I have cancer." He blinked, finally looking up. "What?" I repeated it, slower, softer. "I have cancer." For a moment, there was silence, that kind of silence that hums in your ears. Then he exhaled, long and frustrated, like I had just told him I crashed the car. "You're sure? I mean, maybe it's a mistake." I shook my head. "It's not. They ran all the tests." He rubbed his temples. "God, Emily, I can't deal with this right now. I've got the board meeting next week, and..." I cut him off. "Daniel, I'm scared." He looked at me, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw something in his eyes that terrified me more than the diagnosis. Detachment. Like he was already pulling away, calculating how much this would change his life, his plans, his convenience. He said all the right words after that. "We'll get through this, I'm here for you." But his voice was hollow. His hand on mine was cold. That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, realizing the person I needed the most might not actually be mine anymore. The next morning, he left early for work. No goodbye kiss, no breakfast. Just the sound of the front door closing, like a quiet ending I wasn't ready for. That's when I understood the cancer wasn't the only thing eating away at me. The days after my diagnosis blurred together. Every morning felt the same. Cold coffee, untouched breakfast, and the quiet hum of a house that used to feel alive. Daniel was still there, but it was like living with a shadow. He'd pass by me without meeting my eyes, mutter short answers, and spend hours locked in his office. I kept telling myself he was just scared, like I was. But fear doesn't smell like perfume that isn't yours. The first time I noticed it, he came home late, far later than usual. His shirt collar was creased, and he looked different, lighter. When I asked how work had gone, he smiled faintly and said, "Busy day." I wanted to believe him, I really did, but the moment he kissed my forehead, I caught the scent. Sweet, floral, and not mine. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing beside me. It was steady, calm, the sound of someone untroubled. I wanted to reach out, to ask him to hold me, but I couldn't. I was too afraid that if I touched him, I'd feel how far away he already was. The next morning, I found a lipstick stain on his short collar, coral pink. I held it between my fingers for a long time, my chest tight, my heartbeat loud in my ears. I didn't say anything. Not that day, not the next. I was terrified of what the truth might confirm. When my first treatment appointment came, I told him the time and place days in advance. He nodded distractedly, said he'd be there. But as I sat outside the hospital, watching people rush in and out, My phone stayed silent. I called him once, twice. On the third try, he answered, sounding annoyed. "Something came up. I can't make it." Something came up. That's what he said when my whole world was falling apart. I told him it was fine, but after I hung up, I felt the words burn inside me. I didn't want to cry in front of the nurses, so I waited until I was alone in the bathroom stall. The sound that came out of me didn't even feel human. It was pain made into noise. When I came home that night, he was on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He looked up, smiled faintly, and asked, "How did it go?" Like I'd just come back from the dentist. I wanted to scream, but all I said was, "It went fine." The truth is, nothing was fine. My body hurt, my mind was unraveling, and the person I needed most had already left. He just hadn't walked out the door yet. Days passed like that. Empty conversations, polite nods, no eye contact. Sometimes I'd catch him texting late at night, his face lit by the glow of his phone. He'd turn it away when I walked by. I stopped asking questions. Silence became easier than hearing another lie. Then one evening, after a long day at the hospital, I came home early. His car was in the driveway, but the house was dark. I found him in the guest room, whispering on the phone. "I can't talk long," he said quietly. "She's home." My heart stopped. He paused, then added softly, "I miss you too." I didn't confront him that night. I couldn't. I stood there, frozen, the words carving themselves into my chest. "I miss you too." I went back to our bedroom and sat in the dark for hours, my body trembling. I didn't cry. I just went numb. The next morning, I asked him, "Are you seeing someone else?" He looked startled, then defensive. "This isn't the time, Emma. You're emotional." "I'm sick, Daniel, not stupid." He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck, his usual tell when he was lying. "You need to focus on getting better. That's what matters." And that was it. He walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, staring at the space he used to fill with love. Weeks later, I got a text from an unknown number. "Hi, Emma. We need to talk." It was her. I agreed to meet because, at that point, I needed the truth more than I feared it. We met at a small cafe downtown. She was younger than me, maybe 10 years, with smooth skin and bright eyes. She looked nervous. She said right away, "I didn't know. He told me you were separated, that your marriage was over." I laughed, but it came out hollow. That's his favorite lie. Tears welled in her eyes. "He said you were unwell, that you didn't want him anymore." I looked at her, really looked, and realized she was just another victim, another person he'd manipulated to feed his own cowardice. "You used her," I said quietly, "the same way he used me." She nodded. I ended it. I couldn't keep pretending. I stood up to leave, and she reached out to stop me. "You deserve better than him," she said softly. When I got home that night, Daniel was there. He looked at me like a man caught halfway between guilt and denial. She told me," I said simply. He didn't deny it. He didn't even apologize. He just stood there, silent, like a child who'd been scolded. "I'm done, Daniel." My voice shook, but it was steady enough. "You can go." He opened his mouth, searching for something to say, but I'd already turned away. For once, I didn't wait for his excuses. I went upstairs, closed the door, and finally let myself breathe. In the morning, he was gone. His things, his presence, his shadow, all of it. The house felt empty, but for the first time in months, it was a good kind of empty. I looked in the mirror, pale and fragile, but still standing, still here. And somehow, that felt like victory.
After that night, something inside me broke quietly. Not in a dramatic, screaming way, but like glass cracking under pressure. You can't see it right away, but you feel the splinters when you move. That's how I felt around Mark. Every word, every silence, every look became sharp. He started spending more time at work. At least that's what he said. I stopped asking questions.
partly because I didn't want to hear the answers, partly because I knew he would only give me half-truths wrapped in tired excuses. Deadlines, late meetings, just one more client dinner. The same phrases, repeated until they lost meaning. At home, the emptiness was loud. I'd sit in the living room, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, the faint sound of traffic outside. Time moved, but it felt like I was stuck in some kind of emotional purgatory, too scared to move forward, too hurt to go back. I tried to talk to him one evening. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I said his name softly. "Mark!" He didn't look up. I tried again. When he finally did, his eyes were tired, distant, like he was somewhere else entirely. "I can't do this alone," I whispered. "You're not alone," he said automatically. But his tone was hollow, and I realized being in the same room doesn't mean being together. That night, I went to bed before him, curled up on my side, facing the wall. When I felt the mattress dip, I hoped he'd reach out, touch my shoulder, do something to remind me we were still a team. But he didn't. He just lay there, scrolling again, the glow of his phone casting shadows on the wall. Weeks went by like that. I kept my medical appointments, filled my prescriptions, tried to act like everything was normal. Sometimes I'd see other couples at the hospital, holding hands, whispering, laughing softly, even in the face of fear. I envied them. I envied how disease hadn't taken away their humanity. One day, after another exhausting test, I sat in my car for almost an hour before driving home. I didn't cry. I was too drained to. But I thought about how cruel it was that illness doesn't just attack your body, it attacks your relationships. It shows you who truly loves you and who only loved the version of you that was easy to handle. That evening, when Mark came home, I tried again. "Can we talk?" I asked. "About what?" "About us." He sighed. "Claire, not now. I've had a long day." "It's always a long day, Mark." My voice cracked. "Do you even care what's happening to me?" He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in weeks. But his eyes weren't filled with compassion. They were cold, defensive. "Of course I care, but I can't live like this. You're not the same person anymore." Those words hit harder than the diagnosis itself. Not the same person. He went upstairs, and I stood there shaking. He was right, in a way. I wasn't the same. But isn't that what love is supposed to withstand? Change? Pain? That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the moonlight spilling across the floor. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who laughed easily, who cooked dinner for him every Friday, who believed in forever. That woman was gone, but maybe she had to die for me to finally see the truth. Love isn't proven by words, but by presence. And he wasn't present anymore. The next morning, I didn't wait for him to leave for work. I packed a small bag, just essentials. My medication, a few clothes, my journal. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. Not like this. When he came downstairs and saw the bag by the door, his eyes widened. "What's this?" "I need space," I said quietly. "Space? Claire, this isn't—" "Please, don't make this harder, Mark. You already left. You just didn't pack a bag." He stood there, silent. Maybe he wanted to say something, maybe not. But he didn't stop me when I walked out. That told me everything. I stayed with my sister, Emily. She didn't ask too many questions, just hugged me and said, "You can stay as long as you need." I broke down then, sobbing into her shoulder, releasing everything I'd been holding in for months. Days at her place were quiet, but healing in small ways. She made tea, listened when I spoke, sat with me when I couldn't. It was strange. I was the sick one, but she was the one giving me life again. Mark texted once, "I hope you're okay." I stared at the message for a long time. Just one line. No apology, no "I miss you", no "come home", just a polite formality, like checking in on an acquaintance, not a wife. I didn't respond. Instead, I started writing in my journal every night about how it felt to lose someone who was still alive, about how silence could be louder than any argument, about how sometimes the worst betrayal isn't cheating, it's indifference. And slowly, the pain began to change shape. It didn't disappear, but it softened. I started to feel a strange kind of strength growing where the hurt had been. I wasn't healed, not physically, not emotionally, but I was finally awake. Because sometimes it takes being abandoned to realize your worth was never dependent on who stayed. The first morning in my new apartment was silent. No footsteps in the hallway, no clattering of dishes, no tired sighs drifting from the bedroom. Just me, sunlight spilling across the floor, and the faint hum of the city outside. It was strange, peaceful almost, but also unnerving. For the first time in months, I realized I had space. Space to breathe, to think, to remember who I was before everything fell apart. I started my day slowly, making coffee and sitting by the window. The warmth of the mug in my hands grounded me in reality. I looked at my reflection in the glass and saw a woman who had been broken, yes, but who was still standing. I traced my fingers over the faint lines that had appeared around my eyes and smiled faintly. Each line was a story, a memory, a scar of survival. I didn't expect Mark to disappear entirely from my thoughts. His absence was a constant ache, a shadow that lingered even in the sunniest moments. But instead of fear or sadness, there was now a simmering determination. I refused to let him define my life any longer. The next step was facing the hospital alone. I had appointments lined up for chemotherapy and checkups, and though I was terrified, I walked through those sterile halls with my head held high. No one spoke to me with pity, no one offered false reassurance. For once, I was just another patient, another human fighting against an invisible enemy. And in that anonymity, I found strength. At the clinic, I met other patients, people who had been in similar situations, fighting for their lives while those closest to them had abandoned them. Their stories were raw and unfiltered, but they inspired me. One woman in particular became a quiet mentor. She was older, with silver hair and bright, defiant eyes. She had faced cancer twice before and survived. Her presence was calming, grounding. "You'll get through this," she said one day, handing me a small notebook. "Write everything. Your fears, your victories, your anger. It's your life. Own it." I took the notebook and started writing every night. I poured everything in. Anger at Mark, fear of the disease, guilt for wanting to survive when he had already abandoned me. Writing became a ritual, a lifeline, a way to reclaim myself. Days blurred into weeks. Treatments were brutal. Some days my body felt like it was on fire. Other days it felt hollow, empty, drained of life. But with each session, I learned small lessons about resilience. I learned that fear was temporary, that despair could be held at bay if I focused on one small thing at a time. I learned that even when the world turned its back, I could still stand. One evening, as I rested on the couch after a long day, my phone buzzed. I almost didn't pick it up, but curiosity won. The message was from Mark. "Can we talk, please?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. My first instinct was to delete it, to block him forever, to erase every trace of him from my life. But then I paused. I didn't need closure from him. I didn't need apologies or explanations. What I wanted was to see how much I had changed, to see if I could feel nothing where once there was fear and pain. I typed a simple reply. I'm busy. Take care. No anger, no pleading, just finality. I set the phone down and returned to my journal. The act of not reacting, of holding my ground, felt liberating. The following weeks brought unexpected joys. I began meeting friends for coffee, laughing more freely than I had in months. I took small walks in the park, noticing the way sunlight made the leaves glow, how birds sang even on ordinary days. These moments, though small, were victories. Life was no longer just survival, it was presence. One evening, Emily came over with her husband and their little daughter. We cooked dinner together, the kitchen filled with chatter and warmth. I watched them, and for the first time in a long while, I imagined a future where love could exist without pain. Not the love I had with Mark, fragile and conditional, but something deeper, something earned. Mark did attempt contact a few more times. Calls, messages, even a brief appearance outside my building one night. But I was no longer the frightened, dependent woman he had known. I listened, heard his words, but felt nothing. It was like watching a stranger, someone who had once mattered but now existed in a different world. By the end of the month, I had developed a routine. Treatments in the mornings, walks in the park, journaling at night, small social interactions during the day. I was becoming someone new, someone stronger. And somewhere in the midst of this, I realized that healing wasn't just about my body. It was about reclaiming my mind, my heart, and my autonomy. One afternoon, as I sat in my favorite cafe writing in my journal, a man approached. He didn't know me, hadn't been sent by anyone. He simply smiled and asked if the seat across from me was taken. I hesitated, then nodded. Conversation started cautiously, like a spark testing the air. But it grew, slowly, carefully, into something warm and real. He asked about my writing, my life, listened with genuine interest. I found myself smiling, laughing even without reservation. It was the first time since my diagnosis that I allowed myself to imagine a life that wasn't dominated by fear, illness, or betrayal. A life where trust could exist again, where joy could coexist with pain. That night, I wrote in my journal, I survived abandonment. I survived fear. I survived my illness. And now I'm learning to live. Truly live. For the first time in months, I didn't feel hollow. I felt ready. The road ahead was still uncertain. Treatments would continue. Some days would be hard, some unbearable. But for the first time, I knew that I wasn't defined by my suffering. I wasn't defined by Mark's betrayal. I wasn't defined by my disease. I was defined by my survival, my resilience, and the courage to embrace life even when it was terrifying. And as I closed my journal and looked out the window at the city lights, I realized a profound thing. Even in the darkest moments, even when the people you love abandon you, there is still hope. Hope that you can rebuild. Hope that you can forgive yourself. Hope that one day you can open your heart again. Because living is the ultimate act of defiance against pain, against fear, against the people who tried to diminish you, and I was ready to live.
The morning sunlight spilled across my apartment floor, warm and steady, as if marking the start of something entirely new. I had woken early, not because I had to, but because my body and mind demanded it. After months of fear, betrayal, and pain, I felt lighter. Not completely healed, not entirely free of the weight of my illness or the memory of Mark, but lighter in a way that signaled growth. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the city awaken. Cars moved along the streets below, pedestrians weaving through crosswalks, life unfolding in ordinary, unnoticed ways. For a long time, I had thought that normalcy was lost to me, that my story would always be framed by sickness and heartbreak. But now, sitting in the quiet morning, I realized normalcy wasn't something to return to, it was something I could create. Emily had stopped by earlier with her little daughter, and we had laughed over pancakes, spilled juice, and the usual chaos of family. It reminded me that life could be messy and beautiful at the same time. I was no longer living in fear of each moment. I was experiencing it, fully and consciously. A knock at the door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to see Mark standing there, holding a bouquet of flowers that seemed almost comically fragile against his serious expression. His eyes searched mine, unsure, pleading, as though trying to measure the depth of the damage he had caused. "Claire," he said quietly, I need to explain. Please, just hear me out." I stepped back and let him in, not because I was willing to forgive, but because I wanted clarity. The apartment had grown warm from the morning sun, and I felt a strange sense of calm. Whatever happened next, I was prepared. He handed me the flowers, his hands slightly trembling. I didn't understand how serious it was. I was selfish, I was scared. I know that doesn't excuse what I did, but I'm here now and I want to make things right. I looked at him for a long time. His words were earnest, maybe, but they couldn't erase months of neglect and betrayal. "Mark, you weren't there when I needed you most. You abandoned me. You left me to face this alone." He flinched slightly, but nodded. "I know, and I regret it. Every single day. I see now what I lost." I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. Pain had carved itself into me, yes, but it had also forged resilience. I had survived, I had grown, I had begun to love myself again. "I appreciate your apology," I said finally, "but I can't go back to what we were. Not now, not ever. I need to live for me, not for a version of us that never really existed." His shoulders sagged, and I could see the weight of realization settle onto him. "So, this is it?" he asked, voice low. "Yes," I replied. "This is it. But it's not just an ending. It's also a beginning. For both of us. You need to live with your choices. I need to live with mine." He nodded, silently. Then, without another word, he left. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling a strange mixture of sadness, relief, and liberation. He had been a part of my life, and now he wasn't. But that didn't hurt in the same way it once had. The wound had begun to heal, leaving only the memory and the lesson. Over the next months, my life settled into a new rhythm. Treatments continued, but I faced them with courage and a renewed sense of purpose. I returned to my journal daily, recording thoughts, fears, small victories, and moments of joy. Writing had become a way to anchor myself, to remind me of my strength. I also began to explore new friendships and connections. Coffee with Emily, conversations with people I met at the hospital, even the man from the cafe who had sparked a quiet, genuine connection. Slowly, life became richer, more textured, and no longer defined by fear or abandonment. One day, during a particularly sunny afternoon, I took a walk in the park. The leaves had begun to turn golden and the air smelled faintly of earth and rain. I paused by a bench and sat, closing my eyes to the warmth on my face. I reflected on how far I had come, from fear and isolation to strength and independence. I realized that my journey had not been about Mark or even about the disease itself. It had been about reclaiming myself, learning to trust life and finding meaning in survival. The man from the cafe approached me again, smiling. We walked together, talking about trivial things at first, then slowly sharing our histories, our dreams, and our fears. There was no rush, no pressure, just the steady rhythm of two people discovering the simple truth that connection could exist without dependence, without betrayal. Evenings became a time for reflection and gratitude. I continued to write in my journal, filling pages with lessons, hopes, and visions for the future. One night, I paused, pen in hand, and realized something profound. Life, in all its unpredictability and pain, was still mine. I could shape it, protect it, and cherish it. I had survived abandonment, betrayal, and illness, and that survival was not just endurance, it was triumph. Months later, I looked in the mirror and saw a woman transformed. Not perfect, not untouched, but real, strong, and resilient. Every scar, every line, every tear had forged a part of me that no one could take away. I smiled, not because everything was easy or pain-free, but because I had emerged on the other side. I had chosen life over fear, independence over dependence, self-love over betrayal. And, for the first time in a long while, I felt truly free. Freedom wasn't the absence of pain. It wasn't the return of someone who had left. It wasn't even the promise of tomorrow. Freedom was this moment, this breath, this choice to keep moving forward, to keep loving myself, to keep living. And I did, with a heart open to the world and unafraid to embrace what lay ahead. I had survived the darkness, and in doing so, I had found a light that no one could extinguish.